Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Reinsurance podcast. I am your co-host, Jared Lee.
And I'm Ben Rose, and I'm not alone on this side of the table.
No.
We're with Tom Spier. Welcome.
Hello.
How are you doing?
Nice.
Good. Welcome back to the show.
Thanks very much.
Always here to dive into renewals and all the sort of...
Always a pleasure.
Yeah.
It's my every couple of months.
Yeah.
Come in and talk about what we've been seeing.
Yeah. Oh, last big renewal season of the year. Let's wait till January to talk renewals next with you.
Yeah, there's no renewals in October or
No.
November.
There's nothing else to talk about. Conference season and the like. But
What is Monte Carlo?
yeah, exactly. The deep existential question that we all wrestle with. But we brought you on the show today because that's what we wanted to focus this episode on is let's talk July renewals. We're coming up to the end of the month, so we've sort of final terms have all come through. TOTs are being signed now. Contracts I's dotted and T's crossed.
Well done.
What I really had to. You see me sweating that one out. It's
Well
like a
done.
classic fumble that. But what were you sort of seeing? What's the sort of the broad level market feedback that we're getting?
Well, I think you've obviously read a lot of the reports that are out there, and they kind of point to a much more orderly renewal than 1/1. They point to rates increasing again, but in a predictable way. But I don't think that's entirely a reflection of what we've seen. I think we've seen more of a mixed bag than perhaps the big industry reports indicate. I think there's been, to use a topical reference, there are some Barbies and there are some Oppenheimers mixed in there. And, I think some companies were really prepared for the additional level of oversight, the more stringent requirements that are coming from different markets, and they probably did quite well, and they're probably part of the group that experienced that more orderly renewal. And there are others that remained unprepared for kind of the additional scrutiny that they were under during this renewal period, and I think those companies suffered a little bit.
Yeah, and it makes sense. We talk a lot about sort of how companies leverage data and their ability to do that, but having gone into the 1/6 renewals and we saw what that would look like in the companies who were out earlier and were more well prepared, because what you're having in this environment when the market hardens is just increased competition for capacity at good terms. And in a competitive environment, like how do you stand out? And as I think that mixed bag analogy lends itself very naturally to how we would think about it, going, well, it's competitive now. And if we're going to have to be competitive, we're the firms who are able to evidence that they deserve something different or something better, a less of an increase on rate or similar, they use this as an opportunity to flex that strength that they have.
It seems crazy to me that people weren't, because the lines of business that were going to undergo more scrutiny were inherently predictable all year. It was, we're seeing for months now, people have been saying that, cyber's going to start to get pulled out of casualty treaties. It's going to be a standalone treaty. It's going to be scrutinized, and these are the things that are going to be scrutinized.
Yeah.
And yet still, there were submission packs in the renewals, in this renewal period that I've seen go in that just weren't prepared for simple line-specific data questions that came from it. And I think some people paid the price.
Yeah.
Good pun. No, but indeed, and I think we've seen as well, obviously, a continuing narrative that some cedents have actually tried to adapt to, and others have maybe not quite had a chance to get around to, which is the inflation question as well, and the extent to which you're able to actually show how you are accounting for inflation within your underlying rates, within the way you're preparing your submission packs for the reinsurers. And from a lot of feedback we've had talking with underwriters, it's night and day. Some cedents you have absolute confidence as to how they've been handling those things, and others, the packs arrive and you're like, well, opacity can't tell what you've done here, so I'm going to have to account for inflation on top of what you've provided, unless you can convince me that you've got it covered in here. So
yeah. Well, I think now as we go into the autumn renewals, and it was tongue-in-cheek that this is the end of the big seasons. I think it's the end of the mega seasons, but we're going into the autumn renewals now. Are we then seeing a little bit of panic for those companies who've kind of been just battered the last couple, going, we don't know how we're going to get better results in this next season? Or is there a bit of a hope that like the market might soften and we might just benefit from broader condition shifts?
I think if you're relying on a hope like that, you're going to be bitterly disappointed coming into the next few months. And the companies that we're seeing panic are the companies that have failed to adapt quickly to what's going on. You mentioned the inflation issue, right? I think in January, nobody knew what peak inflation was going to look like. Nobody knew what impact was going to be on different lines of business of that inflationary pressure. And so it's understandable that cedents have a disjointed approach to addressing it in a reinsurance submission. However, now, we're seeing those inflationary pressures come through in real claims costs, like parts and materials costs are inherently there. The information's there in their claims system. They just need to go and look at it and then pass it over to their reinsurance partners. And if they're not doing that, or they can't do that, or they're not equipped enough to do that, then they're being punished.
Yeah, absolutely. I think one of the interesting things that we've seen as well with this general narrative space is that a lot of the brokers, I think, as much as the cedents, have perhaps gotten into a pattern and fallen into a system where they've been in a perpetual soft market for their whole careers in some cases, and actually having to navigate a more tumultuous market where they have to make a convincing case and back it up with data, and not just sort of say some persuasive words and the underwriter begrudgingly...
Same as last year, please.
Yeah. Right, the underwriter begrudgingly says, well, yeah, I mean, we want to be on the panel, we've got to do what they say. It is now, the tables have very much turned.
Yeah. Are we seeing... I think what you'll see in that environment a little bit is some of the cedents sort of handing this responsibility off to their brokers and just saying like, well, are we seeing frustration from the brokers of like, help us help you kind of mentality, where the cedent's going, well, we need better pricing, and the broker's like, we can only do with what you're giving us? And are you seeing some of that, or are the cedents sort of putting their hands up and saying this is on us, or are they passing that blame a bit to their partners in hopes that they can sort of pressure them to try to get something different?
So a lot of the brokers that I've spoken to are there's a level of frustration there, and it's because they're asking for greater, deeper, more buttoned up insights from their brokers. They're asking their brokers to improve the quality of the submissions that are going over and to give additional insights, but they're reluctant to make the underlying information for those insights available to the brokers. And that's got to be frustrating for people. I think in a broker's ideal world, however, like looking at from the other side, in a broker's ideal world, they just have immediate access to all of their clients' underlying data, and obviously an insurance company is never going to agree to that. So it's I think people are still trying to find that middle ground of how do I have enough information at my disposal to answer questions really clearly and really accurately, and not only answer them accurately, but prove that I have answered them accurately with things like audit trails, but then also make sure that they're filtering that information appropriately, so they're not just opening the doors and saying, hey, come in and fish around, because that's not prudent behavior either in a competitive market.
Well, I think it's this ability to give that data and more granular data to your reinsurers, especially, in a way that they can quickly get to what they want. Just like throwing them more also isn't always helpful, because it's like you've buried me in stuff to dig through, but like I'm working through dozens of renewals this week. Like I don't. Thanks for 14 more spreadsheets, but like I can't get to what I need. I don't have the time to sort of go and rework the data. So if you're able to do that, but in a way that the reinsurer is able to say, okay, great, I have what I need. It's all buttoned up. I can ask you a question and you can come back with the answer. In it, all of those things are also really, really helpful.
I think early in the year that was challenging because reinsurers were asking more questions, but I don't think there was the level of consistency that we've seen over 1.7 in what those questions were. If I'm honest, I think some underwriters were like thinking, I need to ask more stuff and just like pick some stuff out of the air and ask for more stuff so that they could satisfy, you know, their bosses and they could, you know, demonstrate that there was some level of scrutiny going into whether they provide capacity in certain circumstances or not. I think now that's getting much more predictable. People are into a regular cadence of the additional information that needs to be provided on these specific lines for these specific risks. And they're not, you know, I think there are Barbies and Oppenheimers in terms of lines of business as well. You know, we know that property cat is being much more heavily scrutinized. We know that, you know, whilst cyber is being pulled out of casualty treaties, that's probably been priced appropriately for about 9 months. And so people are much more comfortable with increasing capacity there or providing dedicated capacity there. So yeah.
I think the caricature that sort of comes to mind of what you said there about the underwriters knowing what to ask is almost for the first time last year and at 1/1, we had underwriters told, so we want you to choose your clients this year. Like, choose? You mean I can choose? You mean I have to choose? But on what terms? And, you know, there was no agreed assessment criteria, or, you know, before it was like, get on any panel you can, unless it's, you know, you really don't want to be on it, but literally as much of a participation on as many good layers as you can get. You know, suffer through the attritional ones in order to get a bit of a space on the layers you want to be on, etc. But when you're suddenly told as an underwriter, you know, actually we're willing to step back a bit and be a bit choosy, it's probably taken each reinsurer from the tone from the top right down to the individual underwriters' own choices a bit of time to figure out what do they actually want to prioritize, you know, what in their eyes is the winner of the beauty contest when the cedents come forwards. And that probably will differ a little bit by firm, by individual underwriter, but there's going to be some consistencies in there as well. And as you said, the market's got to figure out, you know, what makes you a desirable Barbie. Or not, right?
One of the things that fascinates me is the narrative for the reinsurers broadly is sort of been more of a, we're settling back to a business we can write with some margin and we can sustain it here. And there's this resetting that they're sort of positioning this as, and not a knee-jerk hardening, but this is where we need to be. The thing then that I'm really intrigued by is, are we also going to see a sort of perpetual change around what they expect around data in many of the same ways that there was a window of time in which cat models were an optional nice to have as part of your property book. And then some things happened. It was like, we're not looking at this property portfolio if you're not giving us model outputs. Are we kind of easing into this where going forward, there's those questions that the reinsurers are asking now will be forever asked? It's like, this is the new normal that the insurers are going into. Or do we think that when the market softens a bit more in time, that they'll be like, I don't really care about those things anymore. I only really cared about those when I had this real capacity constraint to deploy. That'll be interesting to track.
I think that'll be really interesting. I think right now what people are looking for is the capability to, like, very quickly build a profile based on anything that might be asked. They're looking for that flexibility to quickly respond to changes in questions that are asked, or changes in levels of scrutiny, or changes in macro claims trends that are going to impact the type of questioning that comes through from people. So it's flexibility, but speed in that flexibility. If they're having to go through manual exercises every time a new question comes up, that's just never going to be sustainable.
Yeah, and I think both on a reactive and a proactive basis, right? So being able to produce a profile or produce an exhibit of some kind in response to somebody questioning you, but also if you're ahead of the curve a bit and you've worked out, you've got a case to make about an as-if scenario as much as a what-if scenario, being able to actually back that up with some data. I mean, you know, we hear from underwriters time and time again, these brokers trying to tell us, or these clients trying to tell us that it's going to be different this year because they're not doing X or Y or whatever. But the materiality of being able to show, here's what our book looks like with and without those aspects, and here's how we expect it to perform based on actual performance, is night and day in terms of whether the underwriters will actually allocate any value in terms of the price they're willing to offer, the capacity they're willing to put down, the extent to which they'll hold you up and champion you as a client internally versus, slightly tiptoe away and silently leave you alone.
Well, and that speed is a critical part during a negotiation process, where if you have it where, here's a question I have, and it's a week and a bit to come back, and you go, ooh, what about that? And it's another week. Like, these are the things that drag this up to the line. And if you have it where that turnaround time is that same day, that same afternoon, like, it just expedites all of these things where it will never work to a client's disadvantage to radically reduce the sort of feedback loop and, the response time to questions that they're getting from their partners. That's sort of universally true in any sort of business.
And it's not a strategy to wait until the impact of that is we don't get the reinsurance capacity that we need. And I think sometimes people need to wait for something really bad to happen. That's not prudent in this environment.
I guess we are coming up to time, but any final reflections on this July renewals? Do you think we'll be seeing the same sorts of things come 1/1, or have we reached peak hardening?
I'd be interested to see I don't know if we've reached peak hardening. I think there's enough things that we haven't yet touched that you'll see those classes that we haven't gotten to their renewals in this market yet will sort of still be adjusting up, because I think the broader sentiment is the reinsurers kind of reestablishing what they think is fair pricing for different things. But it feels like everyone's kind of going, we know what the stability looks like here. And as you said, in this renewal, Tom, you have it where cedents have known how they performed at 1/1. They've calibrated for the summer renewals of 1/6 and 1/7. And now they're kind of going, either we can do things better in these upcoming renewals, or we probably can't do anything. And they're bracing themselves for the outcome that is likely gonna sort of impact them.
Things will continue to stabilize, but those that need to catch up know that they need to catch up. I think time will tell whether they do.
Absolutely. And I guess one final thing to mention, of course, is that between now and then we've got a hurricane season to look forward to.
We do.
Well, unless you're in a hurricane zone, in which case probably not. But that will certainly have a major impact as well on how rates are looking.
We have the hindsight of these two renewal seasons. I think how cedents prepared and the way they're able to interact with their data will be a topic that they talk about with their partners during the conference season. And as you said, Ben, we've got the sort of hurricanes and stuff coming up. So we were kind of all waiting to see what the end of this year looks like, but it's going to be an interesting one as we wrap up our July renewal recap.
We have to wish everybody an amazing summer in the meantime, for those having holidays then.
And see you at the conferences.
And for those for whom it is summer.
Yeah, exactly. Someone's freezing in Australia.
Have a great August.
Yeah, exactly. Thanks, everybody.
Cheers.